Gavin Polone was a guiding force behind Larry David's career dating back to when Seinfeld originally aired. Here's Gavin Polone. How did you and Larry first meet?
We met, this would have been quite some time ago, so probably somewhere around 91 maybe. I was an agent, and as part of a job of being an agent, especially when you're younger, so I was probably somewhere around, 27, and I covered a company called Orion, meaning like I would see what they were looking for, what writers or directors they were looking for the company that I was working for at the time. And they had a project called 2 Bits, and they were looking for a director on it. So I had to read all the different projects, and I read that script, which was written by Larry. And I thought, wow, this is a really good script. I want to try to sign this guy. And then Larry and I had a client that I'd already had who was a friend of Larry's, and he kind of put me in touch with Larry, and then I sort of pursued him to become my client because I thought, well, this guy's a terrific writer. He's somebody I can go get rewrite jobs for. And he had already written the pilot for Seinfeld, and I think they had shot the pilot for Seinfeld at that particular point in time, but I just felt like, well, that sounds like a dog. It doesn't really matter to me. I thought, this is a guy I could get writing work for. Because there's not that many people that are uniquely funny in that way, and that really, I could tell from that script that he was. Right. And that's how so I called him, and he said that he was happy with his agent. He was at William Morris at the time. And I said, well, come on, just have dinner with me and let me talk to you about it. And he said, when he learned that there was a free dinner in it, he had dinner with me. And it started from there. And then there was, a very long-term pursuit. It took me about another year and a half in order to sign him.
And by that time, Seinfeld had launched?
Seinfeld had, when I met him for dinner, they had shot the pilot and they had ordered 4 more, which is like not really, and it was not, it didn't sound good.
Right.
Like, you don't order 4 more of a show. And then they had decided that they were going to run it in the summer, which is generally the kiss of death. So it didn't really sound to me. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't even ask to read the pilot. It was all about my feeling like he was going to be, that he could be a big movie writer.
Right. Forget about him being involved in possibly the greatest sitcom of all. We can get some rewrites that are at the studio.
Yeah, no, I thought this was a guy, I thought, well, with that, I could take this script and go to different studios and get him rewrite work, and he could make, $600,000 a year.
When did you transition from being an agent to a manager?
That would have been April of 96.
What motivated you to do that?
I was motivated by the fact that I had been fired, and the pluses were I needed to make a living.
Was there a part of Larry that said at that point, well, I already have an agent, then I don't need a manager, or did you have to educate him on?
It was by that point he was very hot. I mean, Seinfeld was huge back at that point. And so everybody was trying, to get him. And not to mention the fact that that he was either living with, I think, and engaged to Lori, and she was a manager, or had been a manager, and so I think that it was a difficult situation because there were other agents who saw this as an opportunity to try to sign him, and possibly Lori wanted to, push me aside as well. I'm pretty confident of that. And but he's a very loyal guy, and we had done pretty well together from the point that I had signed him to that point. So he stayed with me.
So for people outside the business, could you talk for a little bit about how your job was different, being his manager versus being his agent?
With Larry, it wasn't so different because, when I was an agent, the big difference is you have far fewer clients and you have a more in-depth relationship with all of them. So I went from having, say, 70 clients, most of which I would sort of bring in somebody else at the agency to help me with them because I was a more senior agent at that time. And so so then they would do more of the day-to-day work on, of those 70, say 60 of them. And I was, but on my top 10 clients, I would probably still function almost as a manager, unless they already had a manager. So it's just really about, how in depth you are. So after I left to become a manager, I had maybe 15 clients, and so I was involved in everything that was going on, and just paid. You just pay more attention to it. It's a more intense relationship with a manager than with an agent. So it didn't really change with Larry, since he was one of those, I would say, more successful clients that I had at that point in time. That I had already been pretty much doing everything that I would do as a manager as his agent.
So did the notion of Larry returning to stand-up, which I know was one of the things that fueled the whole Curb journey, was that something that he had mentioned to you or that you had thought of?
He said that. I remember when I had dinner with him trying to steal him away from William Morris, that he wanted to go back to stand-up after the Seinfeld thing was done. And I said, great, we'll do that, and let's look at your performing career. At that point in time, I had taken people who were writers back into performing. I represented Conan O'Brien when I signed him. It was a similar kind of thing. He was a writer on The Simpsons, but he wanted to be a performer. So, I had a track record of that, and it was exciting to me. I wanted that. I think I wanted to represent more performers, so the idea that he was going to be a performer was probably also additive. Again, I had not read Seinfeld and didn't. I was thinking, oh, well, good, he'll do rewrites and he'll be a performer, and maybe he could have his own sitcom. So that was something I was interested in from the beginning. Also, and having learned about him before I even met him, he's an iconic stand-up that was, respected by all other stand-ups and talked about by all those other stand-ups. So it seemed to make a lot of sense that he would go back into it. And I remembered him from Fridays, which I watched also back, going back to when I was a kid.
So when the idea of a documentary based on his return to stand-up came up, were you enthusiastic?
Absolutely.
So could you tell us about the process of that, and particularly in terms of, I guess, going to HBO with it initially, right?
Well, what had happened was he had said that he was going to go back and do stand-up, and I thought that was great, and this would eventually get to the point where, it would go in a direction of his being a performer, which I, again, was enthusiastic about. And I don't know what had happened exactly, but my recollection was he said, he had run into Jeff Garlin, who basically said, you should film that. That's what Jeff had, and I thought that was a great idea. And then he and Jeff had worked out the idea a little bit more about what this would be, a sort of semi-real, semi-fictional kind of special. And so then they kind of formulated the idea a little bit more. And we went to pitch it to HBO, and they said yes. And there was no conversation at the time of it being a series whatsoever. It was just going to be a special.
One notices that in the documentary and in the show, there's a lot of familiar faces in the Larry David biosphere, but you're not there. Was that a conscious decision on your part?
I don't think so, but also there's another factor, which is Jeff is his manager in it, and there are some connections to me. Now, although I'm obviously very dissimilar from Jeff, and the whole part about Jeff cheating on his wife and whatever had nothing to do with me, but the part where that Cheryl and Jeff in the pilot don't get along, really kind of had ties to Laurie and I not getting along. And
that's difficult when you have an intimate relationship with your client, right?
It's tough always. I always used to say it's the wives and girlfriends that murder you when you're an agent.
Right. Right.
So, I had lost, the only times I, really recall ever losing clients were when a wife or girlfriend wanted to have more control over the client, and then they would, they would assert themselves in that way by trying to come between you and getting you to move over to one of their friends, which I had also felt that Laurie might be doing.
At any point, you never felt like Larry was saying this was too uncomfortable. He was just able to separate his worlds.
You mean about that part of it?
Yeah, the dynamic between you and...
Yeah, but that's only one part of the relationship. I mean, obviously, Cheryl's nothing like Laurie.
Right.
And Jeff is nothing like me. So it was just like that one little thing I think he took from his own life, which was the conflict between the wife and the manager. And that also kind of, changed later on in the series. That was really only in the beginning.
Did you ever feel like you had to worry about it?
Oh, yeah. No, I definitely came close once or twice.
How do you engineer a rescuer to keep on part of his world?
You just sort of say, you explain to them that this doesn't make any sense, and does he really want to do this given what had gone on? But, Larry's not a controllable person. Larry has his own point of view. He's not like somebody who's going to just go along with what anybody says. So
right.
In the end, it didn't turn out to be a problem. But there were certainly other people in the background trying to manipulate this, for sure. My relationship with Larry, and I really appreciate, I appreciate him sticking with me for, up until I really ended my management career. As you go through your career, you get lucky and unlucky many, many times. This is one where I just got, inordinately lucky. I mean, I initiated it by recognizing that, Larry is a genius. And I feel like, of the few strong attributes that I have that led me to have success as a representative and a producer going through my entire career, being able to go, that's good versus that's not good, and be right more of the time than I was wrong was really it. And, most people you run into, or people give you a script, or people show you something and you say, we have to make a decision about whether that's something you'd like to pursue. Most people fall into a gray area. I mean, you obviously really know when something's terrible, and you know when something's really great, like amazing. And then who in the gray area you're going to be able to discern. Well, Larry's not that hard. Larry, the uniqueness of Larry's voice is like no other, and that's what genius is. And you don't run into things like that often. So, I mean, it's great because, the William Morris agency, I think like about a year or 2 years before I tried to sign Larry, had let him go. They were pruning their list and they were getting rid of Larry. And, the insanity of that is hilarious. And that they couldn't look through wherever he was in his career, which had a lot to do with, him, what he wanted to do, him being a stand-up versus really focusing on, say, becoming a screenwriter, which really I don't think was his ultimate goal. And that they couldn't see that it didn't really matter what he did, whether he was going to write screenplays or write something for himself or perform, that this guy was a true genius and somebody who had to be cultivated, and you had to go along with him on his journey in the path, along the path that he chose, and try to do everything you could to help him realize his ultimate objectives is ridiculous. I mean, I feel really happy about that, the fact that I had the talent or the foresight to be able to go, this guy is unique and this guy will be successful no matter what he does. But at the same time, I feel extremely lucky that, he was open to becoming my client and that he stuck with me for so long, and including during periods of time where everybody wanted him and where he even had maybe some conflict with his wife about staying with me. When
I hear you talk about people sometimes not appreciating him, I mean, certainly when he was at Saturday Night Live, I mean, he certainly didn't have a great track record of getting sketches on the air, and was kind of like a square peg in a round hole. I think that there were a lot of people that just didn't understand that it was an iceberg, and there was so much talent below the surface and so many other ways that he could express himself and ultimately become successful.
And also the times changed so that people become more open to a certain style or a certain point of view, and then, that's when everything kind of blows up, because you also have to hit the moment. And Larry had been around for a long period of time, and he had the right, combination of things had to happen. But if he's, the one thing that's true is if you have talent and you stay with it over a long period of time, you will eventually get there. Maybe Saturday Night Live probably wasn't the right group of people. Dick Ebersol, probably wasn't the right person to actually see that, he had, one of the few true geniuses in his midst. And as a result, they missed an opportunity there probably to take advantage of it. But over time, there would be the right group of people that would be able to do that. And, even when you look at Seinfeld, because I was involved for, relatively early in that run, even though it had already started by the time I had started talking to Larry, I remember, there was just so many different obstacles and people not getting it from the very beginning before they did. And fortunately, the other thing about Larry is perseverance. I mean, he is a person who hung in and believed in himself and believed in his point of view and never tried to change it so that he could become successful. He waited for the success to come to him and for people to understand what he was doing.
Parachute sheets are the softest and most comfortable sheets you'll ever own. And why is that? Well, simply put, it's because they're made from the very best fabrics. Parachute sheets have a clean, minimalistic style that come in neutral colors, so they work perfect in any bedroom. And the best part of Parachute is that their sheets get softer with time. Plus, if you're a person who wants to make an impact on the world, and frankly, who doesn't, then Parachute is the company for you. They've partnered with the United Nations Foundation to donate malaria prevention bed nets, and they've already donated 16,000 so far. Here's another great part of the story. Parachute offers a 60-night trial, so if you don't love your sheets, you just send them back, no questions asked. Now, if you're wondering how that makes a positive impact on the world, well, all returns are donated to Habitat for Humanity. And that's a great cause. So don't wait. Visit parachutehome.com/origins for free shipping and returns. Again, that's parachutehome.com/origins for free shipping and returns. It doesn't get any easier. It's time to get better sleep with Parachute. So let me ask you, the documentary airs and you guys are thinking that you're done with it, and all of a sudden there's talk of a series. Do you remember your reaction to that?
No, that's not how it went.
Oh, okay. So
the document, we finished it.
Right.
And I thought it was a series right from the beginning. And Larry's agent at the time, because I was now his manager, so his agent was Ari Emanuel, we were sure that it was a series, the two of us. And independent, we talked about it together and then independently had conversations with Chris Albrecht and said, you got to make this into a series before they aired it. And Larry wasn't sure that it was a series, as I recall. It was so draining for him to do Seinfeld. So I think he had misgivings about even going into it, if I recall. And Ari and I just kind of ignored that part of it because we knew it was a great series and that Larry would be great doing it. And we just stayed on Chris. And Chris was like, I don't know. And not saying no, but certainly not saying yes. And then I remember having a conversation with Chris, and he said, I showed it to my mother. She said it's a series. And then I went forward from there. So it was ordered a series. They had already decided it was going to be a series before it aired. Right. He had showed it to his mother before it had aired on HBO, and she had told him for sure it's a series. And that's when Chris came around to Ari and my thinking on it.
I guess one of the obvious answers will be a prepared script, but could you discuss in your history and experience in the business how much of an outlier Curb was once it went to series?
Well, there was nothing like it. Subsequently, there have been massive numbers of imitators, none of which have really done all that well. But to have a show that's largely improv in the way and shot in the way that it is, that has so strong a point of view from its creator and able to maintain that, is not something I've ever seen done effectively. And certainly, to my knowledge, hadn't been done before. So it's truly original.
I'd like to for you to talk about the idea of control, because HBO, Larry was talking to me about the fact that he really did feel like HBO trusted him and he did have some unusual amounts of autonomy. Would you agree with that?
Unquestionably. And there was two reasons for that. First reason was we were producing the show at such a low number at the beginning. And that was something that I pushed very hard for because I wanted Larry to have that kind of control. And I knew that it would never be good, nor would he be satisfied if he didn't. And then secondly, because, Chris Albrecht also is a very unique executive. And not only in this particular instance, but in others that I had with him when he was at HBO, he is a person who recognizes talent and understands that in most cases, a lighter hand, or in many cases, especially one with Larry, will be better and more effective for what he wants, which is a great show, than a heavier hand. So that it wasn't, The Sopranos, where they're spending $10 million an episode, was helpful. But that Chris doesn't feel like he has to control everything, that he's confident enough in his choices about what to go forward with, that he can back off and allow those people to have space, is a large part of why Curb Your Enthusiasm is so successful, because most networks don't work that way. And I've had so many interactions on the 14 shows that I've ever produced over the course of my career, and many movies, and you just, you see too often people, senior executives in positions of power like Chris, who can't help themselves but to try to influence it, and that doesn't necessarily, especially when dealing with like a person like Larry David, yield the best product or help you to create something that feels truly unique. Because if you have one person saying it should be like this, you end up with a lot of things that are like that, as opposed to one thing that doesn't feel like anything else. And that's the specialness of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
When the series started, what did you say to yourself in terms of what your value proposition to Larry was?
My value proposition was very minute, after the beginning maybe, and after pushing Chris to try to pick it up to series. And, for me, it was just trying to be there to be supportive any place I can. But I really can tell you, of all the people who have their names on the show, I'm the least valuable.
Could you give us an example, though, of something that Larry would need you to do, like, say, at the beginning of the series, besides, that equation regarding money with Chris? Was there something once shooting started that...
Yeah, I made, I was just get involved in making some deals and trying to bring, things like, money stuff maybe in the beginning, in the first year or two when we were really trying to keep the cost down. I tried to work with the line producers, and especially on other deals for other people, to try to keep the price down, because, certain things just cost what they cost, but we did make good deals for other what you call above the line talent on the show, and then hiring and things like that. But something anybody can do. Like, there was really nothing that unique that I participated in. I actually am proud, because I pushed hard to do the book. I don't know if you ever looked at the book that they
Yes.
did of the show.
Yes.
Which was something that Larry, didn't have a lot of time to, so I kind of shepherded that a little bit. And, not that this is something that anybody remembers all that much, but I really thought it was a terrific book, and helped hire the writer and put that together with Larry.
Are you ready to make your next move? Well, Squarespace wants to be with you when you do. Squarespace gives people a powerful and beautiful online platform from which to make their next move known to the world. With Squarespace, people can lock down their ideas with a unique domain, create a website to launch their idea, a portfolio to get their project out there, and an online store to officially open for business. There's so much that Squarespace can do for you. So what are you waiting for? Make your next move with Squarespace. Create a beautiful website or online store with award-winning templates. There's nothing to install, patch, or upgrade, ever. And Squarespace offers award-winning 24/7 customer support with fully transparent and simple to execute setup. Squarespace is used by a wide range of creatives, people, and businesses. Use offer code ORIGINS for 10% off your first purchase of a website and domain. That's offer code ORIGINS. And make your next move with Squarespace. Tell me, was there a moment in the first season, though, where it was such a great moment for you, or you thought about a particular scene or an episode that you can remember that you thought, okay, this is what this thing wants to be or needs to be, or this is why it's going to be successful? Something that kind of stuck in your mind above other things that you were seeing.
There's one moment where we were, because I was on the set a lot of the days, or most of the days in the first season, and I can't even remember what episode it is now, but the one where they were in like a group therapy session with Lorraine Newman.
Oh yeah, that was terrific.
And I just thought, I was sitting there watching that and doing everything I could not to laugh on the set, and just thinking, wow, this show is going to be, a classic that's remembered forever. That this series would, because there were so many. I mean, there's so many moments like that, especially when I was remember being like that on the set and thinking that, the Doll's Head was another episode, and
Oh.
When Rita Wilson, confronts him about cutting the doll's hair. I just was, you really do see it happening.
Or when Jeff and Larry pull up and Susie's standing there.
This show and so many moments in the show are not in the gray area. They're in the, this is clearly genius, and you really see it. And so, yeah, I really did see that in those two moments. I really remember being there on the set and seeing that and having that thought.
Tell us about the saga of Larry deciding at the end of every season, or at least not maybe at the end of the first, but I've heard different reports, and he kind of has different takes on it. But certainly it was never a given that he would want to keep on doing it until HBO finally said no. Were you obviously part of that dialogue, and
no.
Was there time that
I would just say, are you going to? And he's like, I'm thinking about some ideas. I don't know. I think a couple times he pitched them to me. But, again, it wasn't like I would talk to him and say, are you going to? But, I just always felt, first of all, like I said, after the show getting going, it's like I had very little to do because this is not, it's not that collaborative in a sense because it all really comes forth from his mind. It's really Larry's show. More than any other show is anybody's show. More than Seinfeld was Larry's show. And so, it's all about his process and what he wants to do. And I always felt like, it wasn't like one of those kinds of things where, you're in a business and you're trying to make things happen. I was just there to be of support to Larry whenever I could, and when I wasn't, I was just a fan. And so I would have conversations with him, but it was just mostly me listening and feeling like if he ended it, then he ended it, and that was fine too. I had already, other areas of my career I had success in a more business-like kind of fashion. This was just, again, a thing where I was really lucky to be around and be a part of to the limited extent that I was a part of, and so there was no me trying to convince him of anything like that. But also I'd been involved with so many renegotiations on Seinfeld, and so many times where he said he was absolutely not going to go back and then go back for one reason or another. And so I also, had a long history of seeing that with Larry and just realizing by far the best thing to do is let things happen organically and let him go through his process.
By the way, speaking of which, when he decided to leave Seinfeld, did you try and talk out of that, or did you know that the way Larry is, if he was thinking that, then that's the way it was going to be?
I talked things through with him, but back then there was stuff that was more about deal things going on, and so he had his original deal was negotiated by William Morris, and it was really it was a really bad deal. So there was a lot of trying to get to the point where he would have the compensation that he deserved. So there was much more of a financial component in there and the chance to equalize things. So I think that was probably more prominent back then, and maybe I would have more of a conversation about that possibility. But still, it's the same thing. I always felt like I'm following Larry wherever Larry wants to go, and I just want to make it what he wants and give him everything that he wants. It wasn't really me trying to influence him to do something. And
that is somewhat different than experience with other clients.
Yeah, every relationship's different, and every person is different. So, there would be big differences between the clients and my interaction with those clients and Larry. And so with Larry, we're also talking about somebody who's had been around for a long time. He had a lot of experiences before me, and so and who has a strong point of view about what he wants to do in every possible way. And so I think more than my other clients, I just sort of reacted versus trying to take the lead. With other, especially since I had a lot of other clients who were closer to my age and younger, than me, and so they needed a little bit more guidance because they didn't have the level of experience that Larry had already having been a stand-up and a writer and on a television show and on various television shows prior to my signing them.
So, last question, and thank you again for your time.
Sure, no problem.
What are your thoughts when you think ahead to October 1st and season 9 of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Right, same as everybody else, excited that there's another season to watch of a great show. And even though there are a lot of shows now, there are a few great ones. And I don't think making more has yielded necessarily more great ones. So knowing that Larry wouldn't go back into it unless he felt like he could make something great, it's nice to have the confidence that that's going to be available to all of us who are fans.
Well, Gavin, I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, no problem. If you need to clarify anything or follow up, let me know.
Great. What are you doing now?
I'm pre-production on a movie, basically. I'm mostly making movies.
And
I had a hit movie earlier in the year called A Dog's Purpose, more of a bigger hit internationally than here, and then I'm starting another movie. Prep starts today on another movie by the same author of that book.
Oh, that's great.
And then we'll probably make the sequel to A Dog's Purpose. This next one is not a sequel, but it's sort of in the same genre. He's kind of like the Nicholas Sparks of talking dog books, and so then we'll probably go into A Dog's Purpose 2 after that.
Well, congratulations, and thank you very much.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this Origins original. Please be sure to subscribe to Origins for new chapters every month, along with other Origins originals and Origins conversations. Thanks so much. For Origins, I'm Jim Miller.